what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, October 30th, 2017, end of the month here. Tomorrow's Halloween. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room today, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And obviously the big news right now is indictments. We've got indictments. Pay no attention to the Russian dossier or the uranium. You don't need to pay attention to that. We have indictments. We have indictments. And nobody is buying this. I mean, we're seeing things like even Natural News is out there saying this is a desperate attempt to distract from the Uranium One scandal and protect Hillary Clinton and all of her associates. The timing is very, very obvious. This thing was just really booming on up there, and all of a sudden Mueller's out there saying, oh, yeah, we got indictments. We've got indictments. They teased it last Friday. They leaked it to the corporate media. There are indictments coming. And it was almost fun over the weekend watching these various liberals being interviewed on the media about what it could mean. And they couldn't contain their joy. They were almost giggling. Yes, we're finally going to get Trump. We're finally going to get Trump here. And so in the end, basically, Paul Manafort and Rick Gates were indicted by a federal grand jury in the Russian probe. And here's where it starts to come apart, because everything they're indicted for happened long before they were ever part of the Trump campaign, when they may have acted as unregistered agents of Ukraine, not Russia. So here is the problem. Robert Mueller's mandate was Trump-Russia collusion, and he's gone way off the mandate. And by the way, leaking that information to the media ahead of time to build suspense, to make sure everyone's paying attention, that in and of itself might have been a crime. So the illusion that this is somehow an objective, unbiased, fair investigation is nonsense. This is open partisan warfare. And normally in the past, this kind of thing is kept out of view of the public because you don't want to upset the serfs. You don't want them, rustling the chains and wondering what the heck is going on. But it's wide out there in the open right now. And apparently, the idea that they can implicate Trump in any of this is, shall we say, an exaggeration. And basically, the focus continues to be on Hillary and Podesta. And apparently Mueller is looking at the Podesta group. Now, whether he's conducting an honest investigation or he's there to head off all other investigations remains to be seen. I tend to favor the latter. But apparently the Podesta group is very, very worried because Tony Podesta has announced he's stepping down from the lobbying company that he and his brother founded. He's getting out of there while the getting is good. And basically, they're trying to imply that because Manafort was dealing with Ukraine when the Ukraine government was still friendly with Russia, that's the link. Oh, there's the Russian collusion. And again, all of this happened before the Trump campaign, before Manafort came on the Trump campaign. I mean, they're grasping at straws here, and it's very, very obvious. And we need to go back and remember something very important, okay? Rosenstein did not have a right to set up Mueller's special investigation panel under the law, just arbitrarily declare one, because if you look at Title 28, U.S. Code Section 592, there has to be a preliminary investigation indicating that there is a real crime there to be investigated. That was bypassed. So not only is Mueller off of his original mandate, his entire investigation is illegal because it didn't have the required preliminary investigation. Now, amazingly enough, he's going after Manafort. We knew that was going to happen because last month Roger Stone came on out and said that Mueller was threatening Manafort. He wanted Manafort to roll over and lie to get Trump, and if Manafort refused, which apparently he did, Mueller was going to railroad him into prison, and that's what we're seeing here right now. Politics don't get dirtier than this. Even Chris Christie is out there saying that Mueller's leakage of all of this information last Friday could be a crime. There are laws controlling how these things are supposed to be done. And you're not supposed to just be leaking to the media anything that might be politically advantageous. But we know Mueller is a politician. He and virtually everybody in his office are Hillary supporters. Mueller himself was part of the Uranium One deal. He's supposed to be investigating James Comey, his good friend and former associate from the FBI. The law requires Mueller should have stepped down because of the obvious conflict of interest. He didn't do that. That's another violation of the law. And this is coming from Trent Franks, representative Republican from Arizona, saying the law required that Mueller disqualify himself from heading up this investigation because of his long relationship with James Comey. So this whole thing is just a joke from beginning to end. And it's going to turn out to be another nothing burger. Now, that's not saying that Manafort and Gates did not do some things that they are probably going to face some stiff legal penalties on. But there's no link between it and Donald Trump. And there's certainly nothing in there that satisfies Mueller's original mandate of documenting a link between Trump and Russia. It is circuitous at best. It's like saying, well, Donald Trump's campaign guy, before he was on the campaign, his hairdressers, boyfriends, lawyers, accountants, chiropodists, may have known somebody over in that knew Putin's aunt's gardener's girlfriend. I mean, that's how tenuous this is. Now, we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Congressman Louis Gohmert is out there saying basically what Mueller is trying to do. He's trying to cover up the Russian cover-up and distract everybody over with all of this stuff about Manafort and Gates. And they're trying to make this $145 million gift to the Clinton Foundation, tangled up with that Russian uranium deal, go away. And everybody sees this for what it is. Even the Wall Street Journal is now saying Mueller should resign. He should step down. Now, Gohmert, in one of these hearings that they had up on Congress, actually got James Comey and Mueller to admit that much of their investigation into Hillary Clinton was basically a fake. And he makes a big deal about reminding them why they were handing out all these immunity deals to all of Hillary's people without a reason to do so. And he focuses on Cheryl Mills' laptop. And Gohmert makes a very cogent point. You could have gotten that laptop with a subpoena. You didn't need to make a deal for that. And you didn't know what was on the laptop and you just give her blanket immunity? So this is all stinking to high heaven. Now, Sarah Sanders is doing a really good job as White House press secretary, and basically was out there just going on the attack and saying, why are you looking at what Manafort did before he joined the Trump campaign? Why are you not looking at the Russia deal? Why are you not looking at the dossier? And she's calling them out on their liberal bias. And they were on the attack against her as well. I'm expecting to see one of these White House press conferences open up where everybody's already wearing boxing gloves. But the reality is here, and even Dianne Feinstein admitted after one of the lengthiest and costliest investigations in U.S. history, they have found zero evidence of any collusion between Donald Trump and Russia. In fact, at this point, the only person in the government who wasn't colluding with Russia was Donald Trump. The Democratic Party was colluding. Hillary Clinton was colluding. Now, Hillary Clinton has denied having anything to do with the dossier. That has already become discredited. And several top Democrats are probably going to be called back to testify before the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee on this dossier. This is coming from U.S. Senator Susan Collins. And this is prompted by the new revelations linking that file to the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign. Now, Collins, who's a member of the Senate's Intelligence Committee, was emphatic that Hillary Clinton's election campaign manager, John Podesta, and the former head of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, absolutely need to be recalled. These congressional investigations are not going to be swayed or derailed by any of this Manafort Gates stuff. That was put on out there to give the media something to look at that wasn't the uranium deal and wasn't the dossier. It was put on out there so that all of Hillary's supporters can say, see, it's Trump, impeach him now, forget about the investigation, forget about that nobody's actually had a trial before a jury of their peers. We've got him now, we've got to impeach him. I mean, there are Democratic members of Congress who are saying, yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. Let's just go ahead and do it. So basically, Trey Gowdy wants to call Podesta and Debbie Wasserman Schultz before his committee, the House Oversight Committee, basically saying that what the Democratic National Committee did is they tried to launder the payments for that dossier by hiring an outside law firm and just giving them the money, listing it on their campaign records as legal expenses, and let the law firm go on out and do the dirty work. And Trey Gowdy is now interested in that. So that's going to be very interesting. Let's take a phone call here from James in Atlanta. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I wanted to ask you a question about that report. Somebody mentioned it cost $12 million. That sounded like a lot of money to me. And then the second thing is, if that thing was a total lie, how come the people that paid for it aren't trying to sue to get their money back or find out, take the next step for being misled? I'll take your answer off the air, and I hope you have a great show.
Oh, well, thank you very much here. Well, the people who paid for that dossier weren't interested in finding the truth. They basically were trying to find a way to create a smear campaign that looked legitimate because it appeared to originate with Russian intelligence sources, and now it appears that Christopher Steele just made that part of it up. And they brought the dossier back, and they tried to use it to blackmail Trump, and he turned them down because he knew it was nonsense. McCain fed it to the FBI. The FBI may have used that bogus dossier to get those FISA warrants to wiretap Trump and his associates, which makes those warrants completely invalid. But, of course, they were never going to go to court with the information they got from the wiretaps. They just wanted to be spying on him and make it look like it was quasi-legal. So nobody's going to sue anybody. They want it to all go away.
But doesn't $12 million sound like a lot of money?
Yeah, but if you're hiring somebody to basically take down a presidential candidate, that may be the going price. And there may have been more than the $12 million involved. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to this, as you know, there's still an ongoing investigation and lawsuits involving Hillary Clinton's email server and the emails that were supposed to be turned over to the investigators and were not, and the State Department is stonewalling. They're saying they still have 40,000 emails to go through, and it's going to take until, maybe 2020, right after the election, before they can finish processing it. Well, the judge isn't having it anymore. And the judge has now ordered the U.S. State Department to explain why it's taken them so long to turn over these emails. Now, do you remember back when there was another batch of emails, really something like 18,000, and they claimed they were able to go through them in the space of a couple of hours and say that there was nothing in there? So it's stonewalling here. Here's the problem. A lot of those people at that State Department are holdovers from when Hillary was there. They are party to what was going on, and that's why they're dragging their feet. Now, there's a big debate on whether Trump should fire Mueller, because he'll come under attack for that. It'll be spun to make it look like he's guilty. But Donald Trump certainly can clean out that Justice Department, starting with Sessions himself, who's clearly not interested in pursuing any charges or investigations against the narcocracy. And here's where you can really smell the panic in the wind coming from the establishment. The corporate media is now taking the position, they're trying to convince the American people that it is illegal for Donald Trump to investigate Hillary Clinton's links to Russia, the dossier, the uranium deal, as long as he himself, Trump, is under any kind of investigation. Well, that's ridiculous. There's no foundation for that in law. I mean, if there were, all Hillary has to do is have her cronies file charge after charge against Trump. Doesn't matter if they're true or not, but as long as there's an investigation, she's safe. It's complete and utter nonsense to say that Hillary Clinton cannot be investigated while Donald Trump is being investigated. That's how desperate they are. And it gets even worse. Apparently, Democrat Congressman Steve Cohen is literally begging Trey Gowdy not to investigate Hillary Clinton. Because when that can of worms rips open, it's going to open all the way back to the CIA's gun and drug running in Arkansas in the 1980s. Hillary will not go down alone. She absolutely will take everybody else with her. Remember, this is a candidate who beat up her campaign manager the night she lost the election. Trying another tack, Democrat Richard Fowler is out there on TV saying, you know something, we've really got too many investigations going on. We ought to just stop any further investigation. We've got the one going on Trump. We ought to forget about all these other investigations. We've got to look at the money that we're wasting, going after Hillary and the Russia uranium deal. I mean, it's all over and done with. This ancient history. We just have to let that go. Richard, no way. No way in the dark regions. Now, here is where there are grounds to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions, because Jason Chaffetz, the former House of Representatives member, chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, was on Judge Jeanine Pirro's show Saturday night, and he dropped a bombshell saying that when he was talking with the Attorney General Sessions simply said he would never comply with any investigation into Hillary or the deep state crooks. He wasn't going to do any prosecutions. Here we have the Attorney General of the United States of America simply standing up there and saying, I will not investigate Hillary Clinton. This is the second Attorney General we've had in a row protecting Hillary Clinton. This is the second FBI Director we've had in a row protecting Hillary Clinton. That tells you just how far, wide, and deep this corruption goes, and it goes all the way back to that flow of drug money pouring out of the CIA's drug smuggling operations. And they're all dirty with it. Now, getting on back to Fusion GPS, back when they were fighting tooth and nail to keep their banking records out of congressional committees, it was observed there's probably something else in there that they don't want to come to light. Well, too late, it came to light, because apparently Barack Obama's official campaign organization paid an additional $972,000 to this law firm that paid Fusion GPS to produce this phony dossier. So it's just spreading far and wide all over the place. Now, the Department of Justice, Congress, the House Intelligence Committee, has reached a deal with Fusion GPS. They're going to turn over all their banking records, so everybody's going to see where does the money trail lead. And this was a big fight. Devin Nunes was just fighting tooth and nail, saying you have no right to refuse this. We already know that this was all being funded by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. And this dossier appears to have been the entire basis for the FISA warrants and the wiretaps on the Trump campaign. This is bigger than Watergate. It is bigger than Watergate. We have to keep this in the forefront of the attention of the American people. The corporate media is going to be going all about Manafort and Gates and all this other stuff, and it's irrelevant because it all happened before he joined the Trump campaign. This is the pay dirt. Look how hard they're working to protect this. And by the way, once we're done skinning Fusion GPS and nailing their hide to the barn, let's talk about CrowdStrike, because their bogus report claiming that Russia hacked the DNC emails, from which they later pulled back, was the basis of all the Russian sanctions. So it's time to go back and look at CrowdStrike. Look at all these little companies that are basically laundering the propaganda, laundering the smear jobs. We had nothing to do with it. The law firm was the conduit. CrowdStrike is the one who told us Russia hacked the DNC servers. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And basically what's going on here is Devin Nunes is shifting the probe. The original probe was there anything to that dossier, the claims made in that dossier? And at this point it's obvious, no, there wasn't. There's nothing there. It's a nothing burger. And so Nunes is now shifting away from that and saying, okay, who was behind this? It's obviously a smear job. And he's now starting to look into the evidence that the Obama administration had unmasked the concealed names of Trump associates in highly classified intelligence reports during the election campaign. So this is starting to build momentum. Now, remember Larry Klayman? He founded Judicial Watch. He's now got another organization, Freedom Watch, down in Florida. This man has an incredibly long track record of going after the corrupt in both parties with equal enthusiasm. Nobody can claim this guy has a bias, and he has basically stepped forward and offered himself to be a special counsel, looking into the matters of the Clinton, the email server, the uranium deal, the fusion. And frankly, I think that's the best idea I've heard in a very, very long time. And I know he's run a petition on his Freedom Watch website. We linked to that, I think, end of last week. But I think maybe an email campaign or maybe getting on Donald Trump's Twitter feed and say, you want a special counsel who's going to actually do the job, you get Larry Klayman out there. And if I could put into a plug to one of Larry Klayman's former associates, Alan Favish, who was the lawyer who took the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit over the Vince Foster death scene photos all the way to the United States Supreme Court. You get these two in there, you're going to get results. But when you look at the deplorable track record of the people who are inside that beltway, it's all swamp. That's the problem. Trump's big mistake when he went in to drain the swamp is he started hiring the alligators and the water moccasins for the key staff positions. And again, you have to go back and look at that shameful display of 2 attorney generals in a row protecting Hillary Clinton, 2 FBI directors in a row protecting Hillary Clinton. Trump needs to start going outside the beltway. There are qualified people out here in the United States of America who can do the job of government, who do not have those compromising connections with the CIA, the drug running, the Clinton Foundation, or any of the corrupting influences. That's where Trump needs to go for a talent pool. There's some very, very good people out here. Larry Klayman absolutely should be a special counsel. Now, up in New York City, the Board of Elections is finally admitting that, yeah, they did break the law during the Democratic primaries, and they threw out 120,000 Democratic Brooklyn voters from the voting rolls ahead of their primary. And they didn't have a legal right to do so. They simply threw them out. And Brooklyn was heavily Bernie Sanders. So the New York City Board of Elections threw that election, threw that primary to Hillary Clinton. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Yeah, Mike, before Trump got in, he should have known, what the heck was Paul Manafort doing in his administration anyway? Who picked him for him? I mean, these are all roadblocks and setups. He worked for the Bushes and the Clintons, Paul Manafort. He was involved with, I would have never got near him at all. Like you said, he's got to go outside the Beltway, Mike. He's not listening to anybody. He's got to get rid of all these people. He's got to get rid of, the top 100 Pentagon officials. He's got to get rid of the CIA officials and the the State Department, Mike. If you don't get rid of them, then it's over, because there's too many of them. You got to get rid of them all.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Trump's biggest mistake coming into the White House, he wanted to be magnanimous in victory, and he was saying to all these people left over from Obama, you can all keep your jobs. I'm the new boss. That's all you need to remember. And for Donald Trump coming out of the world of business, that was a reasonable thing for him to expect. And that's one of the areas in which I said he was as dangerously naive coming into the world of D.C. politics as Jimmy Carter was. Stay on the line, Dustin. I'm going to come back to you after the commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, I'm already getting emails saying, yes, you're absolutely right. The entire inside the Beltway has to go. All of these corrupt agencies have to be just scraped on out like your Halloween jack-o'-lantern. Because Trump was very naive coming into the White House. He really thought, based on his experience in years of business, if I'm the boss and I'm signing the paychecks, you work for me. And he just assumed that was going to be the case going into the White House. And Washington, D.C. does not work that way. Take Versailles, the Borgias, and Game of Thrones, throw them in a blender, hit puree. That's what Washington, D.C. is.
But also the NSA. You can use them. You can use the NSA if you got rid of everybody in the NSA. You know, you can listen in on people's phone conversations, and then also use the FCC, Mike. Pull some of those licenses to CNN and MSNBC. You know, and then Trump doesn't he have a kill switch to come on national TV and announce that, you know, there's a deep swamp? People need to really have a night of him coming out with an emergency press conference in front of, you know, in the Oval Office, say we have a deep state swamp, and explain to the American people what's going on, you know, because, Mike, we can't take another year of this. You realize nothing's getting done.
Well,
I mean,
I don't think we're going to get another year of this, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the show here. But for public perception reasons, political reasons, Trump needs a jumping-off point. And the Clinton Foundation would be it. You rip that scandal open, then Trump has got justification for getting up on TV and saying to the American people, we have uncovered this incredible conspiracy in the heart of our own government. I need your help. We're going to dig it on out. Of course, the last president to talk about a dark conspiracy at the heart of our culture was John F. Kennedy.
But how do you get to this point when you got Sessions, Mueller, all these other people that are just got these roadblocks? You know, it's like one step. Like Trump should have never stepped back at the beginning. You got to go 10 steps forward and roll over them like a steamroller, Mike.
I agree.
Because as soon as if you step back, that's it, man. These people don't take prisoners.
No, they don't.
They
leave a lot of dead bodies behind them. Trump should have put on his presidential brass knuckles the first day he took office.
He still has time, Mike, and like I said, this can't go on for another year. We're a laughingstock of the world for a while now, but it's pretty bad now. I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, it's a joke, but I mean, he still has time, but he needs to just clean house, and I don't know what he's waiting for. Yeah, he better do it quick, though.
I agree.
Thanks, Mike.
He has run out of time. I mean, they're circling the wagons on him. They're trying to turn these indictments for Manafort and Gates into grounds for impeachment. And there's that one Democrat has already filed articles of impeachment charging obstruction of justice. And there's no specifics and no details. But you've got both parties want him out because he's not part of the clique. He's not part of the narcocracy. And if you look at the sloppiness with which all this stuff was being done, using the law firm as a cutout, it's sort of casual. It wasn't, they weren't really working that hard to conceal what they were doing because they were absolutely convinced Hillary Clinton was going to steal that White House and they wouldn't have to worry about any investigations whatsoever. That's why they're all in a panic, because they're all dirty. Remember, there was that anonymous FBI agent was leaking information onto the web saying that all of the major players in Washington, D.C. of both parties are neck deep in the slime of the Clinton Foundation. And after 30 years of the CIA's drug money corrupting the government to serve the CIA interests, it's going to be impossible to find somebody who isn't dirty to some extent or another. And so, yeah, I'd like to see Trump actually become more proactive. And he's unfortunately sold out to the military-industrial complex, but he can't sell out to the political establishment. They have no loyalty. He could give them everything that they want, and they're still going to throw him in the trash can as quickly as they can. All right, let's take a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I want to echo what was said before. There's no way that you can successfully fight back with these guys with the NSA and the CIA, which has overlapping surveillance capabilities, and all these other people who are enemies of Trump and enemies of us. The other thing I wanted to say is, think back to when Barack Obama appointed Hillary Clinton, who he knew to be absolutely, without any morals whatsoever, absolutely corrupt. And you got to wonder, and of course he went through all these speeches. Remember, he was going to end the wars himself. He was going to recognize Palestine and all the things that he said in his speech in Cairo and everything, all that didn't last at all. And you wonder, what did Hillary? How did she turn Obama, who certainly was turned and certainly as corrupt as can be by the end himself? But could it have been that the carrot was, we can make you rich in the Clinton Foundation? We'll give you a couple shares in the Clinton Foundation and in the profit. And B, if you don't, then we'll do something like what we're doing to Trump right now. And that's how she got it. Of course, without a lick of foreign affairs background and only a couple of years in the Senate where she didn't do anything at all. But
well,
anyway,
no. You've got it backward. You've got it backward. I mean, Obama was able to defeat Hillary Clinton despite the vote fraud that was going on back then as well here, because Hillary wasn't seen by the public to have that much experience. So remember, there was that secret. Well, it wasn't secret. Everybody knew it happened, but it was a private meeting between candidate Obama and candidate Hillary Clinton, where they went into this house and they had a discussion. And the deal that was made there was that Obama was going to probably win the election, and in exchange he agreed not to gore certain oxes, not to overturn certain rocks, and that he would appoint Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, which would give her the credibility to run for president last year. And I think that was the deal that was made. And Obama simply signaled right from the very beginning he was willing to go along with the existing power structure, the existing corruption, and that's why he wasn't all that big a threat to them. Trump was this total, complete outsider. And the Republicans tried to derail him. Then when he became the nominee, everybody tried to derail him. They tried to steal the election, and they failed because the American people are so sick and tired of the existing political corruption that we were just desperate. We were going to grab anybody that wasn't inside the Beltway. We would have elected Bozo the Clown into the White House as long as we knew he wasn't connected with that deep state. And unfortunately, however it came about, whether Trump knew he was lying or whether he's been threatened with his life or whether his family's been threatened or whatever the deal is, he has been co-opted and corralled. But again, he made a couple of big tactical mistakes, actually strategic mistakes. He tried to be magnanimous. He let too much of the old guard stay on board, and they had him from that point on.
Mike, the only way out of this, honestly, and this is really no solution, the only way out of this is for Trump to invoke that the National Defense Resources Preparedness Act that basically where you declare martial law, because there's no way out. And by the way, that's no way out either, because
there's no legal foundation. There's no legal foundation for him to declare martial law. Right now, this is purely a political conflict, and it's being, fought out in the courts and the media and the floor of Congress, none of which represents a military threat to the United States of America. What I still see as the best way out, and this may be the beginning of it, is we're going to rip the lid off of all this corruption in Washington, D.C., and it's going to collapse the way the Soviet Union did, because that's what brought down the Soviet Union, was the Soviet citizens just finally waking up to just how corrupt the central government was. They didn't have an internet, but they did have fax machines, and they were just faxing all this stuff back and forth all across the Soviet Union. The Soviets couldn't get a handle on it, and eventually the Soviet Politburo simply collapsed because nobody was listening to them anymore. And I think we're coming up on a similar situation here.
Well, I agree with you. That's by far the preferable thing, because even martial law, Mike, is, then we're stuck with a Nazi martial law government, right? But the only way Trump is going to survive is martial law. It ain't going to be with the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and all their intercepts and all the deep state arrayed against him with,
No.
he didn't have a prayer.
I disagree. I think if Trump were to try to invoke martial law, that would backfire on him tremendously, because people realize he doesn't have a reason to do so. But as I was talking to Dustin, what Trump needs is a jumping off point for an attack against the deep state. He's got to get one of these people dead to rights on either the dossier or preferably the Russian uranium deal, or even better, Hillary committing espionage while Secretary of State. Once he's got that as his hammer, then he can go after the rest of them, and he'll have the support of the American people behind him.
It's a lot to overcome, Mike. All the intelligence agencies, the media, at least the corporate media.
Peter?
It's a lot to overcome, man.
Peter?
Yeah.
Look how much we've overcome in the last 20 years.
Well,
the trend line is
I don't
obvious.
know. We're in pretty bad shape.
No, we
I don't know what we've overcome.
we perceive we're in bad shape. That's the important thing. We were in just as bad shape 20 years ago. Again, the CIA is selling drugs to our kids in the street, but most Americans didn't know. Now they know differently. We've made tremendous strides over the last 20 years. The trends are obvious in all the polls that show that the American people don't trust the corporate media anymore. They don't trust Congress. The thing most Americans are most afraid of right now is their own government. And to me, that is a huge amount of progress along the way towards the collapse of the central federal government and the restoration of our republic.
Mike, there's just one thought before I sign off here, and that is remember that all these intelligence agencies, including the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, all of them were compromised and politicized wrongly against their charters.
So was the KGB. So was the KGB. So was the GRU. The Soviet government was just as corrupt and compromised as our government is today. It didn't prevent the collapse from happening, because when you lose the support, trust, and faith of your general population, government simply can't function any longer.
I'm saying my prayers, Mike. I really am.
Okay, well.
All right, thanks, Guy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. All righty, now then, let's get on over to the war zones. Emphasis on the plural because things are heating up over there. As you know, the UN came on out with a reassertion of the claim that Assad gassed his own people in Idlib, basically last, I think it was April 4th. And everybody's saying, why are they still flogging this dead horse? Well, it turns out the U.S. new strategy in Syria is becoming visible, and that is they're simply going to hunker down where they are right now and refuse to give that land back to the Syrian government. In other words, it's a de facto invasion in place, and they're beating that dead horse about chemical weapons to try and justify it. And here's where it gets undermined immediately. The Syrian army continues to find all these terrorist depots. In the current one, the Jabhat al-Nusra terrorists, they're finding these depots with all of these toxic materials and precursors for chemical weapons. The evidence is it was the U.S.-backed rebels who were doing all of this, but the U.S. is still saying, oh, it was Assad, he had chemical weapons, even though he gave them all up, he made more, like Saddam had nuclear weapons and the rest of it, and we're just going to sit down here. We've got to protect the Syrian people from the evil Assad. And right now the U.S. is trying very hard to prevent the Syrian army from capturing the ISIS-held Abu Kamal. So forget what the U.S. government is saying. Look at what they're doing. The U.S. is fighting on the side of ISIS in Syria to keep the Syrian forces from liberating Abu Kamal. That's the reality of what's going on in Syria. They still haven't given up trying to turn that around and turn it into, well, if not necessarily an outright victory, at least it won't be called a defeat. Now, Syria's foreign ministry is saying, as far as they're concerned, Raqqa is still occupied. The fact that the U.S.-backed forces went on in and kicked ISIS out hasn't changed the dynamic as far as Syria is concerned. That's their city. They want it back. And the true scale of the U.S. presence in Syria is an open question at this point. Right now, the Syrian Kurds are refusing to reveal how many U.S. bases are inside that and around that area of Raqqa. They're refusing to disclose the volume of arms supplied to them by the United States. And I imagine the Kurds in Iraq are feeling a little bit slighted because the U.S. is still fully on board with the Syrian Kurds and has basically abandoned the Iraqi Kurds to the wolves. Now, here's an interesting story. The former Qatar Prime Minister was in a TV interview and basically came on out and said that Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the U.S. colluded and coordinated to fund al-Qaeda and destroy Syria. Now, I don't know about the laws in those other countries, but in this country, giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war is treason. And we were all told al-Qaeda was our enemy, ISIS was our enemy, and we're getting more confirmation that the U.S. government was spending your tax dollars to send weapons to ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria. That's an act of treason. People should be hanged for that. Meanwhile, Turkey's beginning to show that it is turning into a wild card. Another column of Turkish army has entered northwestern Syria. So this may be the beginning of a new huge push. You know, to retake Syria and declare it liberated as long as it's under foreign puppet rule. Now, turning on over to Iran, Iran's Minister of Industry, Mining and Trade, Mohammad Shariatmadari, say that 3 times fast, is basically saying Iran will continue its support to Syria. Now, mind you, this is economic support. This is not military. But Iran and Syria are all still buddy-buddy. Meanwhile, of course, the U.S. is out there screaming about Iran's missiles, Iran's this, Iran that. And the top Iranian general, Chief of Staff of Iran's Armed Forces Major General Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, is saying that it's a waste of time talking to the United States government because of their long track record of simply not keeping any agreements or promises that they make. And so from now on, the United States government is going to be judged not by what it says, not by what the corporate media claims is being done, but what is actually happening out there in the real world. Now, Iran's Navy commander, Rear Admiral Hibibullah Sayari, is saying arrogant powers will not dare to invade the Islamic Republic as long as the country maintains a high deterrence power. And he says that's what all the missiles are all about. Deterring invasion. And that's a very reasonable position because look back over the last 16, 17 years of war. Who is it who's initiating invasions, regime changes, drone strikes? It's not Iran. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's not any of these countries. It is the U.S. government. And every nation has a right to self-defense. That's just common sense. On the individual level, that's why we have the Second Amendment. We have a right to defend ourselves against outside aggression. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the situation in Iran. And as you know, Trump has refused to recertify the Iranian P5+1 deal, even though Iran is fully in compliance, as attested to by the IAEA, even though every other signature to the agreement wants the agreement to stay, even though the vast majority of the American people want the agreement to stay, according to polls. But Trump's going to go on out and say, we're going to decertify and we're going to make stink face. Now, here's the key point. Iran is trying to say, let's keep things where they are, but they're already out there saying that if Trump unilaterally pulls out of the deal and the deal is dead, they are prepared to crank up their nuclear program as quickly as possible. And they're saying basically they could resume 20% uranium enrichment at Fordo in 4 days. Now, whether they would get their existing stockpile of uranium back from Russia is very much up in the air. But before anybody starts screaming about Iranian nuclear bombs, I want to remind everybody that the degree of enrichment is very critical. Most nuclear power reactors, the enrichment level is anywhere between 5 and maybe 10, 12%. Nuclear weapons, you have to be up 95, 96% enrichment. And that is a big deal because it's not just like going into the uranium centrifuge and turning a dial from 20 to 90. It's a little more complicated than that. But what's really interesting is Iran is looking at a new peaceful application for nuclear power. And the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran is saying it's starting to develop nuclear propulsion systems to be used for marine transportation purposes. And this is an idea that I actually floated some years ago on this show. Right now in the United States, nuclear propulsion is confined to military ships. And at this point, the carriers and the submarines are it. All of the other naval forces are conventionally fueled, using up petroleum, putting carbon dioxide in the air. Somebody alert Al Gore about that. But some years ago I said, look how much fuel is burned with this global shipping network. And maybe it's the time to develop commercial shipping nuclear power. Maybe around thorium cycle reactors, which are far less dirty than fission reactors, and you can't make bomb stuff out of them. I think that would be a major revolution, and it looks like Iran is getting ready to do just that. It would absolutely change the face of global shipping around the world. The oil companies certainly aren't going to like it. There's a good reason to invade. Invade Iran. They're threatening our oil profits here. And meanwhile, Iran has announced their space agency. They're going to launch what's called the Dusty satellite by the end of the year. They've been working on developing their own civilian space program. Of course, here in the United States, the corporate media is saying it's just a cover for them to test nuclear missiles. They're not really putting a satellite up there. Doom and destruction, and it's the Iranians, and everybody's turning them off. We're going to do station identification. Back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to go to the telephones here. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You were talking about jumping off points for Trump. And I think Trump is very smart as to what he did with the JFK files. You see, it's like an onion. They threw the onion out there, and they're just peeling a little bit off and peeling a little bit off. And when the people find out exactly who killed the president and how they set it up and who's still alive, because I'm sure that's going to come out, there's too much there to not be able to put the pieces back together again when he's already put this out. And he knows all he has to do is sit back and watch this thing unravel. And when it does unravel, that's going to be a lot of the deep state that's gone, because he can take those people apart like Kennedy threatened to do. And he'll have the backing of all the Americans, the American people. They'll all be united to say, hey, you know what? This is not our country like it should be. This is what these people have taken from us. And look what they've done. And look how they tried to safeguard it. Now, he's right just to sit there and watch the whole thing unravel, because if you've been watching what's been coming out, you know, little by little, the onion's getting unwrapped. And I think he's sitting in a good spot right now. As far as the other people are concerned, you know, they'll say, hey, you know, that's still connected to this other stuff, too. And he'll have a big hammer to swing when the people finally realize that they've been lied to by a media that's been paid for by the government, the deep state government. And I think it'll be a great day for America again, and America will be great again.
Well, obviously it's important. I mean, there has been some very interesting information coming out of the last JFK document dump, but for the vast majority of Americans, it is remotely in the past, and they don't feel an immediate sense of personal threat or affront. And so its effectiveness as a jumping off point, I think, is very limited. It certainly can be used as a supporting argument to hammer home the fact that what we're dealing with today is not, in fact, a new problem. But I think it needs to be something right now where people are saying, yeah, this was actually part of my life experience. And for the vast majority of Americans, that John F. Kennedy was assassinated before so many people were born. Even I was just a little kid when it happened. What we need is something right here, right now. The selling of 20% of America's uranium to Russia, that is immediate. That poses a serious threat, because Russia could turn that uranium into nuclear weapons to aim back at us, or they could sell that uranium to other countries who do not like us. That's a much more pressing and immediate threat. You don't have to be wading back through linkage after linkage after linkage. Whatever the Trump jump-off point's going to be, it has to be something where Americans are going to say, oh, wow, yeah, that's why my life is wrecked.
What if they could say somebody that used to be the president was involved in this and his whole family?
Oh, they definitely can say that.
I mean, et cetera, et cetera.
They've already dragged Obama into this whole Uranium One deal.
Well, I'm talking about the Kennedy thing.
Well,
but anyway, you're breaking up. Have a good day, and aloha.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here, and we do seem to be having some technical issues we're dealing with here. Our infrastructure has really deteriorated into third world levels. I ran another speed check on Spectrum Internet, and we're getting only about maybe 20% of what we're actually paying for. Getting on back to the war zones here, Iraq is now deploying soldiers to the key Kurdistan border crossing. So it looks like the Kurdish independence deal is pretty much over and done with. Barzani, who's the Kurdish regional president has now stepped down and apparently is seeking asylum up in Belgium. Meanwhile, the leadership of the Iraqi Kurds are saying, why is Washington punishing us? We were their key ally against ISIS in Iraq. Why did they turn their backs on us? Why did they betray us? And, of course, the glib answer is because betrayal is what we do. Just ask Saddam or Assad or Gaddafi or any of these others here. But the reality is that the United States really did not want to get ISIS out of Iraq, just like they didn't really want to get ISIS out of Syria. They wanted to use ISIS to balkanize the countries, break them into smaller parts. And the Kurds were not exactly helpful on that. And in the end, the U.S. just turned their back on them, which is what the U.S. government tends to do here. All right, let's grab another phone call. Steve in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I understand the differences in the weapons-grade uranium versus power to power your city. My question to you is there anything going on in Iran with, or has it been prevented by the United States government from bringing in solar to Iran? Is there any kind of solar power going on in Iran right now?
I imagine there probably is, but again, solar has a tendency not to really pencil out. Despite tantalizing claims of increased efficiency in the solar panels, the reality is you have to cover so much ground with solar panels that it's coming on and it's growing, and it's actually becoming a threat to the existing electrical power infrastructure. But again, you can't power a cargo ship on solar panels. And I think that's one of the reasons why Iran is looking at this idea of nuclear maritime propulsion. And I think it's a really, really good idea.
No, I agree. That was my next nuclear. As far as that's definitely a way to go. I would see that would be a possibility. Hey, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, apparently, Iraqi forces have succeeded in liberating over 21,000 square kilometers of the territory near the border with Syria. So, as is the case in Syria itself, the U.S. proxies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are being driven out. And both the Syrian and Iraqi governments are now saying, look, you said you were here to deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are pretty much gone despite your constant interference. It's time for you to go. And the U.S. is looking for a reason to remain and garrison the countries. And as we said earlier in the show, it appears they're going to try and revive this idea that Assad is gassing his own people, where the U.S. is simply going to stay where they already are with all their bases and simply say, well, we're here to stay and we're going to draw a new border and this is going to be a new country, which just happens to coincidentally have the vast majority of the oil and other commercial reserves here. Now, down in Yemen, they're dealing with this absolutely horrendous cholera epidemic, and it's just killing people, and people are sick all over, and it was spreading all over the place. And I'd observed a couple of weeks ago that it didn't appear to be a natural infectious pattern for cholera. And sure enough, apparently, Yemen's army spokesman, Brigadier General Sharif Lugman, is now accusing Saudi Arabia of deliberately spraying cholera over the Yemen water supplies in an act of biological warfare. We're going to take another phone call. Dennis in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Michael, I'm really, I don't know, maybe I missed this, but I just saw something this morning about if you're going for relief in Texas, disaster relief, the paperwork that you have to sign if you're going to be a contractor for this is that you will not boycott Israel is one of the things that are in there.
Yes.
And there's actually a website where they called up and asked them on the phone about it. Even the people administering it were kind of dumbstruck, but they want to, push it off to higher ups. Is this for real or what?
Yeah, it's for real, and it's not just the contractors. It's anybody applying for aid to replace their lost home. In the contract is you have to certify that you are not boycotting Israel, you're not part of the BDS movement, and you agree not to be part of the BDS movement for the term of the contract, however long it is going to take to get your home rebuilt. It is wholly inappropriate And apparently
Holy cow,
it comes from Governor Abbott himself, who's very pro-Israel and seems to think of Israel before he thinks of the people of Texas. And there was actually a law out there where they're trying to outlaw BDS, and somebody made the harebrained decision to incorporate this into all this disaster relief, and it has provoked a tremendous backlash. And my advice to the Texans is, next election, you find yourself another governor.
That's 100%. Yeah, that's 100%. Unbelievable, Michael. Unbelievable. You know, is another funny thing. All of the aid that we do get to Israel, okay, is not really documented because there's a large number of loans that are made, and
Yes.
I say loans in parentheses, quotation marks. These loans are never paid back.
Yes.
They're loaned out this money, never intended to have a payback.
Yeah,
And have been getting away
Congress will pass a resolution forgiving the debt so that Israel can say they've never defaulted on a loan. But it's just another way of looting the American people and feeding it into Tel Aviv.
I read about that years ago, Michael, when I used to be on the Daily Paul, you know, back in those days. It's funny you had that fella just on before saying, well, it's the American people, and what if Trump knows, and what if the people know? You know, as far as disclosure on all these things with the JFK assassinations, etc. Here's another example of disclosure that's never meant. Here's another example of we will never get the facts out because the media is run by the powers that be, and part of that is Netanyahu and company.
Well, you know, Netanyahu was supposedly facing, he's facing heavy opposition from the Israeli people, even from within the Knesset, and they were looking at him for all these corruption charges, but apparently now his cronies in the Knesset are going to pass a bill saying that sitting prime ministers cannot be investigated or indicted for any crimes they commit. So it's basically, it's a carte blanche. If you're prime minister of Israel, you can commit any crime that you want. And again, it's another indication of how corrupt the whole system is. And that corruption is spreading out of Tel Aviv, and now it's corrupted Washington, D.C. Or the other way around. I don't really know. Okay? All right, I guess Dennis hung up there. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on over to Korea, very alarming story coming out of Sputnik News. The U.S. will never stop drills with Seoul, South Korea in return for freezing of North Korea's tests. In other words, the one bargaining chip that they might have had to cool the situation down is now off the table. And, President Trump has hailed China's efforts at the easing of the North Korean nuclear crisis while blaming Russia for not doing enough. And as you know, this Friday, Trump is leaving for his Asian tour, 12 days. But they're basically saying the U.S. is going to go on having exercises off the coast of North Korea no matter what North Korea does. Well, they've just taken away any incentive for North Korea to try and accommodate U.S. interests. Meanwhile, Mattis is out there saying the U.S. will never accept a nuclear North Korea and says North Korea is reducing our security. No, North Korea, in the face of continued U.S. aggressions over the last 16 years, is trying to prepare to defend its country from an American attack, which is very obviously being telegraphed. And North Korea is getting ready for it. They're conducting mass evacuation drills, blackout exercises, because they know that the U.S. Pioneered the graphite bombs to destroy electrical systems. And again, another provocation. The U.S. has banned entry of South Korean activists who are opposed to Trump's war on North Korea. The group was planning to visit New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. They had meetings all set up to say this is really dumb, and they were blocked literally at the border. Now, despite his talk about praising China for their work on North Korea, the U.S. has actually sanctioned China over the North Korean missile launchers because a Chinese company provided the vehicles, the actual truck beds. Ooh, you can't do that. So I don't know how accommodating Xi Jinping is going to be when he and Trump finally meet. Although I imagine probably a vast part of that discussion will be about the petro-yuan rather than North Korea. But the reality is, it is the U.S. that is escalating the situation, and nothing underscores that more than the returning of the B-52s to 24/7 on alert status. They're playing with fire. And if you go back and you study the history of the last Cold War, you will recall there were several near misses with those weapons. B-52s that crashed. They lost bombs into the Mediterranean. Took them forever to find that. There was another crash high in the mountains where they were concerned that the bomb could actually go off. Supposedly, there's still a nuclear weapon buried in the seafloor someplace off the coast of Savannah, Georgia. Remember that movie War Games? That was actually based on a real incident where somebody was feeding a training exercise tape into those big computer banks that control the nuclear missiles, and the message that it was a training simulation didn't get out. And they were on the verge of punching the button when they finally realized what was going on. Now, anybody who's a gun enthusiast will tell you the safest way to have your gun is you have the clip with the ammunition outside the gun, separate from the gun, nothing in the chamber. That's about as safe as a gun can be. What Donald Trump has done is he's taken the gun, taken the magazine, slapped it in there, and cycled the action to put a round in the chamber. That's what these B-52s symbolize. And when you have a live gun with a live round in the chamber, that's when accidents happen. And that's what we're concerned about, a nuclear accident. And it's not just the B-52s. The U.S. has deployed a B-2 stealth bomber fitted out for carrying nuclear weapons to an unidentified area of the Western Pacific ahead of next week's planned visit to the region by President Trump. They're talking either Japan or Guam. So they're out there making war, bashing war. We're going to do war this, war that. The support logistically may not be there. We've been hearing all these horrible stories about America's poor quality weapons, and now it looks like the supply chain is coming up short because now the F-35s are being grounded because they don't have enough spare parts. Apparently, 22% of the existing F-35 fleet is grounded because they can't find the parts for it. Or they're not manufacturing enough parts for it. They're wearing the parts out faster than was expected. Meanwhile, the United States is starting to bolster their nuclear weapons stockpile. The administration of Trump is seeking to rapidly expand and upgrade the Pentagon's nuclear stockpile, claiming it's a force for world peace. Well, I'm sure the folks in Hiroshima and Nagasaki would absolutely agree with that. Absolutely ridiculous here. Okay, let's talk about the JFK files release. I haven't spent a lot of time on it because it did happen so long ago. And we have things that we need to look at right here and right now. The uranium deal, the Russian dossier, the build-up to a probable nuclear war. But there was one thing that did come out in this latest document release that we need to pay attention to. The original Surgeon General's report on the assassination said that the first bullet wound on the body of John F. Kennedy entered the throat just below the Adam's apple, which was actually in the news before the cover-up was put in place. Now, since Lee Harvey Oswald was ostensibly to the rear of Kennedy, 6 floors up, this demolishes the lone gunman theory and suggests there was a shooter probably down on the triple overpass. And that's worth paying attention to. That's the end of the crazed lone shooter theory. And a reminder that the U.S. government and the corporate media have been lying to you all since 1963 and probably a lot longer before that. Just brazen, barefaced, bold, lying to you constantly. Even after the House Select Committee came on out and confirmed there had been multiple shooters in Dealey Plaza, the official story was, oh yeah, it was Lee Oswald. Absolutely. You know, if you think otherwise, you're a tinfoil hat, kook, crazy conspiracy theorist. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to before you're ready to stand up and tell the government and the media, I'm not listening to you anymore? We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, for those who wish to become supporters, patrons, if you will, patrons, if you will, of Republic Broadcasting, the mailing address is, grab your pencils, Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, and that's in Round Rock, Texas, zip 78664. And if you wish to call in and make a donation by a credit card or debit card or some other means, the phone number would be 800-724-2719. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Joey in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I totally agree with you. I'm going to be 70 years old, so I'm well aware of the Kennedy assassination. And my question to you is, what do you think about this forensic doctor, Michael Batten, who's renowned in the field, and he's on Fox the other day, and he's explicitly stated that Oswald was the lone shooter. And then you got the other guy, Posner, who wrote a book, and he says the same thing, that Oswald was the lone shooter. Now, who's BSing who here?
Well, anybody...
With all the facts that are coming out.
Well, you know, being a BSer is a very highly paid job in the United States of America, whether you're working for a public relations firm or you're working for the intelligence agencies. And you know, Posner, throughout the years, he's made a career of writing books attacking anybody who doubts the official story on anything. And every time I see him on TV, he can't even get the smirk off of his face. He thinks he's so clever. But here we have the actual government files confirming there was an entry wound on Kennedy's throat just below the Adam's apple. And again, that had actually been reported immediately after the assassination. And then they changed it and said, oh, no, it was an exit wound because all the gunshots came from behind. And you had Dan Rather, who came on TV, and he was a small market newscaster at that time. Nobody knew who he was, went on TV and said he'd been shown the Zapruder film, and he could see Kennedy's head rocket forward from that headshot. And he immediately rather became network stardom and the start of a huge career. And then, of course, when Jim Garrison charged Clay Shaw in the assassination, the Zapruder film was made public and confirmed that Dan Rather had lied to us all. He'd bought his career by lying to the American people about which way Kennedy's head went from the headshot. And now we have these last few documents that have finally been declassified, confirming there was at least one more shooter in that in Dealey Plaza. And that means that whole lone assassin story was nonsense. I mean, there's actually a photo of Lee Oswald standing at ground level on the street the moment Kennedy grabs his throat. The James Alkins thing. I've seen that. Yeah. Anyway, as we get more toward the anniversary of Kennedy's assassination, we'll spend a lot more time on that. But today I want to stay focused on uranium, pending wars, and so forth. So thanks an awful lot.
I understand.
We're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy. Hey, I was in Austin, Texas this morning at a meeting with Representative Roger Williams from Texas, a very conservative man. He was talking about Dodd-Frank. He said that thing had no oversight, congressional oversight. He says, I guess something passed the House. They're trying to get it through the Senate now. Maybe you can tell us all about Dodd-Frank, and I'll sit by your feet and listen.
Well, first of all, I mean, are they trying to repeal it or renew it? Because Dodd-Frank was passed quite some time ago. And I'll tell you what, I'll do a little research on it in the next break, and we'll come back to it here. Meanwhile, a little story about the Las Vegas shooting. And again, I'm not paying a lot of attention to that. You know, it was an obvious government false flag. But a lot of dead bodies are showing up. Some of them have turned out not to be confirmed, so we got to be very careful. This story made the Washington Post. And it involves a couple, Dennis Carver and his wife Lorraine, who survived the shooting in Las Vegas, and then 2 weeks later they die in a car crash. And from the description given by their younger daughter, it sounds like there was a bomb in the car. The official story is they hit a metal gate, but it was a huge bang, and it took the firefighters hours to put the fire out. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently Hillary Clinton is back on the warpath against Fox News. How can you talk about uranium and frothing at the mouth and everything? Now, getting on back to that last caller, what he's talking about actually happened last June. And basically, they repealed the Dodd-Frank bill, which imposed regulations on Wall Street. And the Republicans are saying, oh, it was an unnecessary burden. But we know from past history, every time you deregulate Wall Street, bad things will happen. And they called it the Financial Choice Act. But if you actually look at what it accomplished, it repealed the Volcker Rule, which prevented government-insured banks from making risky bets with investments. And it scrapped the requirement that retirement advisors put their clients' interests ahead of their own. So this was a bad thing for ordinary people and a great thing for the bankers. Remember what happened after they repealed Glass-Steagall? That's what set the stage for the 2008 meltdown. And they haven't learned a single thing from that debacle because they didn't pay for it. You did. You paid for it all. Okay, now then, getting on back to the news here, talking about the economic news here. Right now, the big issue for the U.S. economy is China's announcement of a petro-yuan. And they're already starting to sell contracts deliverable at the end of the year. And it surprised a lot of analysts who didn't think China had the courage to do that. Meanwhile, Russian experts aren't startled because they've seen this coming for a very long time. Ever since Moscow abandoned their attempt to integrate with the West following the 2014 Ukraine crisis. And I think that petro-yuan is probably going to be a big part of what Trump discusses with Xi Jinping. Because look at it from the U.S. point of view. The U.S. economic system, Wall Street, banks, got very lazy following Bretton Woods. There was no way they weren't going to make money with the rest of the world using the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking. And then following the Nixon shock in the 70s when he ended gold convertibility, they propped up that deal with the petrodollar, which was they went to all the oil-producing nations on earth and said, if you promise to sell your oil only for U.S. dollars and invest that money in the U.S., we will make sure that you live in peace. Unfortunately, ever since 9/11 and Israel's increasing aggressions against their neighbors, the Middle Eastern nations have come to understand the U.S. can't keep that promise, or based on past performance, simply will choose not to. And that's what led Iraq to decide they were going to sell their oil for the euro, which led to the Iraq War. That's what led Libya to sell their oil for the gold dinar, which led to the killing of Gaddafi in that war. Because in those years since Bretton Woods was signed, the U.S. basically became complacent. And they allowed their manufacturing to decline. Even the supposed showcase of our manufacturing prowess, our weapons, aren't very good. Even Israel is thinking the F-35 was a raw deal. So if China is now starting to introduce a petro-yuan, if Russia follows suit with a petro-ruble, there's nothing left holding up our economy except those printing presses over at the Federal Reserve, or actually technically at the Treasury Department. And then we'll be in Zimbabwe territory. We'll be carrying around paper notes that say $100 trillion on them, and they'll be worth virtually nothing. Now, there's been a new scandal regarding gold, and I'm pleased to note that History Channel is still, every once in a while, rerunning America's Book of Secrets, which we did, I think it was about 4 years ago now. And one of the most popular episodes from that series was the gold conspiracy, where we talked about, where was the gold? And we were talking about how Germany was trying to repatriate their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of France, and they were getting the big stall. Was there really still any gold in Fort Knox? We were talking about the plague of these tungsten cord fake gold bars with the hallmarks of Fort Knox. And everybody's saying, where did the gold really go? There's been a new scandal, this one involving the Royal Canadian Mint. And apparently this jeweler went to the RBC branch, the bank, and bought what he thought was a 99.99% pure gold wafer that he was going to use to fabricate some jewelry from. And his goldsmith, after cutting it out of a little card, these little gold wafers, they come on a card with a plastic bubble and all these holograms to assure you this is really from the Royal Canadian Mint and it's really gold. And the idea is people buy these things and they stash them in the closet. They very rarely open them up and actually try and use the gold inside. So this jeweler couldn't get this little gold wafer to go through his tableting mill. So he gets pliers and he tries to bend it. Now, pure gold is very, very soft. You've probably seen the old cliche of somebody getting a gold coin and they bite it. That's because pure gold is soft enough where you will leave teeth marks in it. That's where that comes from. So he takes pliers and tries to bend it, and it cracks, leaving a jagged edge. They ran tests on it, said it wouldn't even test to being 14-karat gold instead of 24. They don't even know if there's any gold in there. It could be a flake of tungsten plated with gold. And they tried to take it back to the bank. The bank wouldn't take it back. The Royal Mint wouldn't take it back. Then he went public. Now they're taking it back, and they're saying that this packaging did not, in fact, originate with the Royal Canadian Mint. Maybe, maybe not. The Royal Canadian Mint has actually had a past problem with Mint employees taking the real gold home with them and placing counterfeits in those little packages. So, again, it raises the issue. Where is the real gold on Earth? Who's got it all? Did Goldfinger really succeed in robbing Fort Knox? So if you're going to invest in precious metals, and I recommend that you do, you go to a reputable dealer and, feel free. If it's a gold coin, just take your fingernail and scratch it. You have to be very skeptical. There's a lot of fraud out there right now. It's sort of become the lifestyle of 21st century planet Earth. Everything's a scam. Everything's a fraud. Now, JCPenney is joining the long list of iconic retailers who are in their death throes. They're thrashing around on the floor, heading for the death rattle. And again, they're still trying to blame Amazon for it. And Amazon is doing very well. But Amazon's total sales, while impressive, are still a small fraction of the total consumer retail economy. What's going on is people don't have money to go buy things. And if they did, they'd be going to the stores rather than Amazon. Because that's the retail experience, is instant gratification. You go into that shopping mall, you see what you want, you look at it, you get to hold it and see if it's built well, you give them your money, you get your product, you get to go home. That's really what drives retail, is instant gratification. And I really get sick of stores that you'll go into and you'll say, do you have this? And they say, well, we don't have it on hand. We can order it for you. And I'll say, I can order it. I want to look at the product in my hand and make sure it's actually quality so that I don't get sent something that sort of kind of looks like the catalog picture when it arrives in the mail. All right, let's take a phone call from Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Aloha. I survived Maria. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm glad you survived.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Mike, I want to make a quick comment about the Whitefish scandal here, the electric company.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize that the Secretary of the Interior is from Montana, that part of city where Whitefish is from.
Yes.
And my question is, do you think Donald Trump is aware of that?
I have no way of knowing one way or the other. I have no way of knowing. I have no way of knowing one way or the other for certainty.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, sorry I couldn't help you on that one. All right, let's go over to Vera in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Vern, are you there? Vern, I'm not hearing the phone.
I brought him up. He's not speaking.
Vernie, so Vern's not talking. Okay.
Not here. Don's here.
There he is.
There you are. Okay. We're having trouble getting connected.
Don in Iowa. Okay. Are you there, Mike?
Yes, I'm here. You're on the air.
Okay. I just wanted to say that the Manafort guilty of using offshore accounts. Oh, like that's so unusual. He's unique. You know, he's probably the only guy in Washington D.C. that has offshore accounts, right?
Well, I guess they wouldn't let him into the Clinton Foundation.
Everybody's guilty of offshore accounts. But the only thing I want to say is Trump would be totally justified in just giving him, as soon as he gets convicted, just pardon him. Him and that other guy both. And even that other guy for lying to the FBI, because the FBI sets you up where you have to lie to him almost. It's entrapment.
Yeah, but unfortunately, if Trump were to issue pardons on these people, the media would seize it and use it against him. Trump has to
hell with the media.
That's easy for you.
I say hell with the media.
That's easy for you and I to say. Okay, but Trump is still having to deal with that portion of the American public, which took the blue pill and is still living in that fantasy life, hooked into those TV sets. Now, we know the vast majority of the American people are on Trump's side on this. We know the majority of the people are seeing through all the corruption. But Trump still needs to be very careful. He's got to play that political game. And I think at this point he's come to understand he really is a neophyte, and he's still trying to find his way through as to what he can do, what he can't do, how aggressive he should be. I think he should be a lot more aggressive. I thought he should have been much more aggressive the first day on the job, get out his presidential brass knuckles and just say, we're really going to clean the swamp by cleaning the swamp, not by opening the doors and letting the swamp pour into the Oval Office.
Well, he just do one simple thing, get a real attorney general there. That's all he has to do. One thing, get a real attorney general to do the job of attorney general, because all these congressional investigations don't mean anything. It's just a lot of hot air. I mean, they can recommend an indictment.
Well, here's the problem with that. Okay, Trump can nominate an attorney general or a head of an FBI. They have to be confirmed by Congress, and Congress is just as corrupt as the rest of them. They're never going to confirm somebody they're going to see as a threat to their own personal power or criminal backgrounds. That's why we've had 2 attorney generals in a row who refuse to investigate the deep state. It's why we've had 2 FBI directors in a row who refuse to investigate the deep state. And again, going on back to what we said in hour number 1, Donald Trump ought to get Larry Klayman up there and make him a special counsel.
Well, that would be good, yeah. I'm going to try to write a letter to my congressman, because I've already talked to him one time. Not that he remembers me, but I might write a letter. Okay, I'll let you go, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now then, let's step back here a little bit and remember that this whole issue of sanctions against Russia goes all the way back to the accusation that Russia hacked the DNC email server, which was based solely on CrowdStrike's claim that they'd found evidence of Russian hacking, which CrowdStrike then backed away from after other security companies challenged their methodology. And remember, nobody but CrowdStrike was allowed to look at those servers. The FBI never did a forensic analysis on the email servers, the DNC email servers. The CIA never did one. The NSA didn't. These are the government's top experts, and they were not allowed to look at it. But that was the starting point for this escalating war of sanctions against Russia. And Russia is now starting to respond. The Council of the Federation has upheld a bill providing for the introduction of restrictions on cooperation between Russia and the United States. 2 key areas: the export of titanium and space activities. These are major deals. Russia has huge amounts of titanium the U.S. needs, and the U.S. does not have domestic supplies. And the issue of space cooperation, everybody was kind of hoping that the space would be left off to one side, because right now the U.S. is still dependent on Russian-manufactured rocket engines. Because back when we were all buddy-buddy with Russia, and the globalists were saying, well, we don't need countries making everything they need themselves, the U.S. kind of walked away from making rocket engines. They're trying to catch up now. And so far, it's been a very costly disaster. And they need those rocket engines. And now all of a sudden Russia is saying, we may not be willing to let you buy them anymore. In fact, Russia could go as far as to say, we're not going to let anybody buy any rides up to the space station on our spaceships anymore. So this thing is really spinning out of control. Almost has kind of a 2010 feel about it. the astronauts up on the space platform are getting caught in the political crossfire. All right, let's grab a phone call. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael.
There you are.
Hey, I wanted to talk to you about armed police drones. I'm convinced they're coming to America, and they're already in China. We have an R2-D2 police drone that is armed with an extendable arm that can tase you.
Sounds like a Dalek to me.
It uses advanced facial recognition software, as well as it can sense danger. And so I believe the way it senses danger is that it's picking up the electromagnetic pulse of your heartbeat, and it can detect elevated pulse rates, which may be in alignment with somebody who has high adrenaline as they're planning to start a fight or do an attack or something. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know about you, but if I saw something that looked like a Dalek approaching me, my pulse rate would be pretty high.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling prophecy for tasing you, right?
Yeah, really, that's it. And looking at how tasers can actually kill, then yeah, I think that would make anybody nervous that it's rolling toward. Now, is this experimental, or they've actually deployed it now?
It's deployed. And I just want to remind everyone that we just have to be thinking 10, 15 years ahead about where this is all going. And it starts now with checking yourself out of the grocery store and the self-driving cars. If we don't have an attitude that at least of disdain, at least towards the automation of our civilization, we're going to be destroyed by it. We have to at least have a background cultural disapproval of the robots, or they're going to win.
Well, I agree with you on that one, because most of the robots are being turned to tyrannical purposes. I know that there are fun robots. I know there's a big question mark over the so-called sex robots and everything. But again, my biggest opposition to robots right now is not necessarily as police enforcement, but we're leading to a culture in which there are going to be no jobs for humans. And then how do you prop up the economy when you're doing that? We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're finishing up here on the economic news. And if you will remember, what led to the intervention in Libya and the death of Muammar Gaddafi was an effort to break free of the private central bank U.S. dollar hegemonic domination by Muammar Gaddafi. He shut down the private central bank, established a state central bank with a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and then he announced that Libya's oil would be for sale only for the gold dinar. And the rest of Africa were looking to Libya to lead the way into a post-U.S. colonialist economic situation. And that was the real threat. Wasn't just that Libya was going to stop using the dollar, it's the rest of Africa was going to follow suit, and they were going to start trading in the gold dinar. Well, apparently the reconquest of Libya and the death of Gaddafi have not discouraged these other nations, because now we have Uganda and South Africa are calling for the economic liberation of their countries. They want to run their economy for their own country and their own people, not just as a branch office of USA Inc. Now, getting on up to Europe, to nobody's surprise, the population numbers are growing rapidly, but it has nothing to do with birth rates, and it has everything to do with the flood of migration. And basically, they're estimating now that because of migration, Britain's population will swell by 3.6 million over the next decade. This is equivalent to a city the size of Cardiff. And it's expected to reach 70 million by 2029. Here is the problem. These migrants and refugees coming on in are not contributing to the tax base, which would allow for the expansion of the infrastructure to support the increased population. See, that is a problem. When your population is growing, you have to grow the infrastructure with it. More water mains, wider roads, more rail systems, and that's not happening. And that means the existing infrastructure in Britain and in all the European countries and across the United States of America are already struggling with loads far larger than they were originally designed to have to deal with. And it's another example of how these globalist policies are being implemented without actually thinking all the way through to all the possible ramifications and consequences of what they're doing. They just get the idea in their head. We're going to migrate everybody from the Middle East and Africa to Europe. That's going to be great. Well, it's great for everybody except the Europeans. Now, over in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel is looking at serious consequences for his decision to harbor illegal immigrants in Barack Obama's hometown, because it is a Title VIII violation. And now there's actually talk about the federal government starting to prosecute some of these mayors and governors for Title VIII violations. And, of course, in Rahm Emanuel's view, it's all Donald Trump's fault. He's not with the agenda. Of course he's to blame. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And somebody just sent me in this story. It's a flashback, actually. And it basically goes back to 2009 when China received a shipment of gold bars from the United States Department of the Treasury Bullion Depository in Fort Knox. These crates came directly from Fort Knox. Now, the gold is regularly exchanged between countries to pay debts and settle the balance of trade. We're supposed to use paper and ink and numbers in a computer, but banks and countries still prefer to trade in gold. So here is the problem. Chinese officials, being of the doubting kind, actually tested these gold bars, which had been shipped to them from Fort Knox, and the serial numbers indicated they had been in Fort Knox for years. And they were found to be tungsten cord fakes. So there is a real question. Is there any of the American people's gold still left in Fort Knox? Because it does belong to the American people. It's not the property of the government. It's technically the property of the American people. And it looks like somebody has made off with it. Of course, there hasn't been a real audit or purity testing of Fort Knox in over half a century. Now, back in the 70s, following Nixon's gold shock and accusations that there wasn't much gold in Fort Knox, they held a press conference. And they took a bunch of people into Fort Knox. They opened up one vault, which had a wall of gold bricks right up to the front, but nobody was allowed to touch them. Nobody was allowed to purity test them. They weren't allowed to open any other doors. Where did all the gold go? Who has got it? Is the big question. And it is an important question that needs to be answered because that's the property of the American people. And we know from the behavior of, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Bureau of Land Management, government seems to have come to believe it has the right to appropriate, or to be more accurate, misappropriate the property of the American people. You've seen all these abuses by the Bureau of Land Management. We know that the Environmental Protection Agency was started by Richard Nixon in the wake of the gold shock to allow the government to grab public lands, sequester them away from the public, and then pledge them and their mineral resources as collateral on government borrowing. So it may all be an illusion. The money, the gold may already be gone. Now, as you know, Spain is turning out to be a very a tinderbox, if you will. Madrid imposed direct rule on Catalonia just 40 minutes after the region finally declared independence. The Spanish Prime Minister is calling for calm, but there have been huge, what are called unity demonstrations all over Spain. We don't want Catalonia to go. The problem is here, not just for Spain, but for all of Europe, is they've just demonstrated there is no more real democracy in the European Union. Because the people of Catalonia voted for independence, and they're not going to get it. Same thing happened in Kurdistan, because there is this fascist globalist dictatorship that is not willing to let anybody escape their slavery. And it's going to come back to haunt European politics for decades to come. So, now over in Germany, their Social Democratic Party, their leader, which suffered its worst defeat in September's parliamentary election since World War II. Their leader, Martin Schulz, has made a decision to basically go into opposition against Angela Merkel. And he's basically saying if Merkel cannot form a new coalition government, there should be new general elections. But the reality is this desire for independence and sovereignty is going worldwide. And it's not coming from any one source. It's just something that springs from our hearts. We want to be free. We don't want layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of parasitic government ruling over us, trying to control every little minute detail of our personal lives merely to satisfy their continued employment as our masters. And we have seen how out of control it's got. It has gotten just here in the United States of America. We're no longer free to decide what food we will eat and what food we won't eat. We're no longer free to decide what medicines we'll take, what medicines we won't take. There are laws controlling absolutely every aspect of our lives now. In fact, it is now impossible for you to live your life in the United States of America without having violated several laws along the way. And by the way, the Soviet Union used to be the same way. They had laws about everything. Everybody was automatically guilty of something, and the instant you stepped out of line, then you'd be prosecuted and charged. It was all driven by politics. This actually gets back to what happened with Manafort and Gates, because as that caller was humorously trying to refer to earlier, everybody in politics is engaging in these little side deals, offshore banking, trying to cut the rules and bend the rules. Everybody does it, and everybody does a nod, nod, wink, wink, until you become somebody's enemy. Then they'll hit you with it. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Apparently over in Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is done talking about George Soros and the Open Society Network. He's basically, the propaganda is getting on out there, but he says it's time for an investigation. It's time for an intelligence probe into George Soros' Open Society Network, what they're really doing, who's really funding them, what is their real goal and agenda, because everything Soros has touched in Europe has turned into a disaster for the people of Europe. Now, getting back here to the United States of America and all of this white privilege, attack the whites nonsense, it is really getting absurd. Now, there's a social psychology professor, Jesse Daniels, of the Graduate Center at the City University of New York and Hunter College, and he's out there saying that the white nuclear family is one of the most powerful forces supporting white supremacy. He's literally out there saying that if you're reproducing white children, you're part of the problem. It sounds to me like he's coming up on mandating that whites must be forced to intermarry with other races. And by the way, something I couldn't help but noticing, I'm still a big fan of Lee Remini and her show on Scientology. And I'd heard a lot of these stories before when I was in Hollywood. I had a couple of brushes with the Scientologists when I was working in Hollywood, and they scared the heck out of me. But they had this episode about how the children were being taken away to these camps. That were the advertising brochures, it's camping and it's horseback riding, it's a lot of fun, and it turned out really to be little more than a labor camp with lots of physical punishment to make sure they were going to graduate as true fanatical Scientologists. And I'm looking more and more like the techniques used by cults like Scientology are starting to remind me more and more of the tactics being adopted by the liberal establishment. And I'm beginning to think liberalism has become a cult, just as dangerous, just as out of control as Scientology. Now, down in Virginia, there is a church called Christ Church, and it's one that George Washington attended. And there is a plaque in the church on the pew where he used to sit. And now the church has said the plaque is going to be taken down because it makes some people unsafe. I don't know why. Washington's been dead a really long time. The other thing is, well, George Washington owned slaves, therefore his plaque must come down. Well, get out your Bible and check Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. It is one of numerous passages in the Bible that condone slavery. So shall we start tearing the churches down? You can see how out of control and ridiculous this can become. The reality is every culture throughout history at one time or another has condoned and used slavery. You can't erase them all. Now we're still seeing the backlash of Harvey Weinstein, and a lot more accusations are coming on out. Kevin Spacey apparently has come out as being gay now that he's been accused of rape by a then 14-year-old. So it is really starting to come on out. Now, Corey Feldman is out there. He's trying to organize a bunch of survivors to come forward and say, yeah, we got abused, we got raped, we got assaulted. We were told if we didn't do these things, we would never work in Hollywood again. And everybody's out there criticizing Corey. Oh, you're just seeking fame and fortune, and, why didn't you mention this before? Well, it turns out in 1993, Feldman did file a police report naming his abusers. He told the police he was molested. He told the police who molested him. But at the time, everybody was focused on Michael Jackson, and they basically just dropped the case. Now, during the 1993 accusations against Michael Jackson by Jordy Chandler and his family, police were so focused on Jackson, they ignored Feldman's bombshell admissions and information. The admission was even recorded by police. But when the tape recording was released by the Hollywood tabloid Radar Online, the names Feldman gave were erased from the audio. Our entire society has become hopelessly corrupted. If you see a couple of angels show up at your door knocking and saying, "Can we stay the night?" you know you're in trouble. Meanwhile, Google has announced a partnership with the International Fact-Checking Network, which is funded by the Open Society and George Soros. And their goal is to censor the Internet, to not let you see, read, or hear anything that does not fit in with Soros' globalist agenda. They're trying to figure out a way they can shut down the independent media and get around that gosh darn pesky First Amendment, which says that we're allowed to criticize the government of the United States and, for that matter, of Israel. We're allowed to point out when bankers are less than honest, when media is less than truthful. They really don't like that. They're trying to figure out a way they can return us all to the comfortable embrace of a corporate media-dominated society like we had back in the 1950s and 1960s. So far, they're failing miserably. And they're going to fail because now everybody sees what they're doing. It's one thing to have a successful propaganda campaign when the people being propagandized don't realize that's what's going on. When they actually think what they're getting from the TV sets, from the radios, from the newspapers and magazines is factual and truthful. Once the people are awake, and Americans are, it's a whole different ballgame. Everything that is done to try and silence independent voices is seen as confirmation of the growing tyranny in this country. They're up against the law of diminishing returns. The harder they push, the less effective it becomes. Now, getting into science and medical issues, there's a Rhode Island-based physician, Dr. Gerald Rosenberg, who's pled guilty before the U.S. District Court in Providence on grounds of health care fraud and illegally prescribing the highly addictive fentanyl-based cancer pain drug Subsys, manufactured by Chandler, Arizona-based Insights Therapeutics, for which he was paid kickbacks. This doctor was paid $180,000 $88,000 in kickbacks by the pharmaceutical company to get his patients hooked on this addictive drug. So apparently federal authorities have now arrested the billionaire founder and owner of Insys Therapeutics on charges of bribing doctors and pain clinics into prescribing these addictive drugs. The Department of Justice charged John Kapoor, 74, and 7 other current and former executives with racketeering for leading a national conspiracy through bribery and fraud to coerce the illegal distribution of the company's fentanyl spray, which is intended for use as a painkiller by cancer patients. Knocked 20% off the stock price of the company. Frankly, I think the company should have evaporated at that point. But money is money, and whatever makes money is good, and what doesn't make money is bad. Our entire society is corrupted, even the medical establishment. It's all driven by money. And I'm not saying money's a bad thing. I'd like to have money myself. I'd like to have money for a newer car. I'd like to have enough money to get Claire and I off this rock and back to the mainland. The reason I don't have that money is I'm not willing to do certain things that others do that are very well compensated for, such as lie to you, or push products that I know are bad, or fraudulent, or defective. We live in a society in which honest, moral, ethical people are actually being systematically punished for not going along with the scams, the frauds, the organized crime. Is this a country you want your children growing up in? Now, getting on over to Madagascar, that situation is spinning rapidly out of control. And for some reason, they keep saying it's pneumonic plague or then bubonic plague. But it really is all about the same thing, and it is continuing to spread like crazy. And 9 other countries have now been alerted that travelers from Madagascar have managed to reach the mainland in Africa. Now, the plague is airborne. And what is really complicating the situation is the people of Madagascar, this being the autumn where many countries have their festivals of the dead, ours is tomorrow, they actually have a tradition of the dead being wrapped in sheets and paraded through the streets. And people dance around the bodies. They're dancing around the bodies of people who've died from bubonic plague. And that is what is really spreading this disease like crazy. And people are being told, don't do that. And they're coming back saying, this is a sacred ritual. We have to do this. That was one of the big problems when Ebola started erupting in Africa, because it was the custom when somebody had died that you would kiss them on the forehead before they were buried. And, of course, that was the vector of transmission. There comes a time when you have to stop believing in the sacred whatever and start looking at the reality of what's going on in front of you. And I'm not saying trust science blindly, because science has proven itself to be as untrustworthy as anything else in our corrupted society. But use your own common sense. Trust your instincts. Most people, when they see a dead body, they pull away. There's a reason for that. Because early on in evolution, those hominid ancestors of ours who didn't pull away didn't live, didn't reproduce. There's a reason we have an instinctive aversion to dead and sick people. It's to control the rate of transmission. And it wasn't a conscious decision, we're going to evolve to avoid infection. It was simply the inevitable result of 2 different sets of random behavior deciding who would live and procreate and who would not. So, now I've talked a long time about some of these chemicals that are being put in our food. And at my age, I'm having to really read labels. I just went through a bad period of serious joint pain, which finally realized was exposure to yet another chemical in the food, which I'm now avoiding, and things are a lot better. But now there's a study that's come on out saying that monosodium glutamate and aspartame are now the two leading causes of permanent central nervous system damage in the United States of America. Now, we knew that about aspartame because before it was approved as an artificial sweetener, it was a biological weapon, an excitotoxin. And it would overstimulate neuron receptors and cause nerve damage. And in high doses, it would cause death. Now it's turning out monosodium glutamate operates exactly the same way. But it makes money, so of course we're going to put it in the food. And if you get sick, it makes more money because now you got to go to the doctor. See how life is like in the fascist states of America. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting on over to the Menendez corruption case, interesting development. The defense has now arrested. They're going to do closing arguments. The jury will get the case toward the end of the week. But interestingly, at the last second, the defense filed a motion for a mistrial, arguing that the judge acted unfairly against them by forbidding a defense witness to testify because the witness's testimony would have been hearsay, which is normally not allowed in a court of law. And so Menendez's lawyers are saying, well, in this case, we should allow the hearsay evidence. The judge disagreed. The judge has dismissed the motion for the mistrial, so that's moving forward. That's the good news. The bad news is apparently U.S. District Magistrate Judge Deborah A. Robinson has dismissed the lawsuit brought against former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton by relatives of victims of the 2012 Benghazi attack. So the fix was in on that. Judge Robinson was, of course, an Obama appointee. Let's start taking some phone calls here. Jim in Gainesville, Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. This is Jeff Shackelford from Zanesville, Ohio.
Please don't use your last name. You open yourself up to all kinds of...
That's fine.
All right.
Okay. I appreciate that. There's so many topics, I don't know where to start, but I will start with the fact that I haven't heard anything about the JFK tapes being released. The main news media has been pretty quiet about it.
Well, I imagine so. I mean,
look into that?
We're reporting it here in the independent media, and certainly the corporate media is not going to be interested in reporting on any of that, especially that original Surgeon General report that there was an entry wound to the throat below the Adam's apple, because that corporate media, they were all complicit in the lie of the lone assassin all of these years. They're not going to stand up there and say, yeah, we were lying to you all this time, but trust us when we tell you Iran has a neutron bomb or some such nonsense as that.
And I hate to say this, but my parents would have loved to have read that report, and they waited till they passed away, where they would have really been up in arms, because they were the ones that really got us through that era. And for the Kennedy era and stuff like that, it seems like that's when the coup first started.
Well, certainly that is when the U.S. started going down this dangerous pro-fascist direction. And it's rather interesting in Oliver Stone's movie JFK, which I imagine is going to be on the air real soon, and everybody's going to be watching it. There's even a line in there by Walter Matthau, who's playing a U.S. senator, saying it just seems like the United States has just gone down this terrible direction. Everything's gotten worse ever since Kennedy was assassinated. And that was true. Kennedy was like the golden age, Camelot, race, going to the moon. And ever since then, the U.S. has just deteriorated into this hollowed-out shell of a war machine where their solution to every problem is, let's drop bombs on people.
Oh, I totally agree. Since Eisenhower, right after the World War II, and then they end up saying that Adolf Hitler was still in Argentina and stuff in '55 with a film video of it. Just, to me, it seems like we've lived nothing but a lie from then to now, to where I feel like my 50 years, I'm 58, but I feel like 50 years of my life has been constructed by smoke and mirrors.
Well, don't feel bad about it. I'm sure that first 8 were also equally obstructed by smoke and mirrors. You've been lied to your entire life, so have I, so has everybody listening to this program. The difference is now we know it, and we know to be on the lookout for more lies in the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, it's people like you that I've grown to focus in on. I've had 15 different people I've listened to on the radio and stuff. I've narrowed it down to you're on it. you're on it, and I really appreciate the time and the investment that you put into it. And I know they gave you a bad deal, too. So it's payback time, so I appreciate it.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot, Jim. We're going to let you go, and we've got more callers waiting on the Thank you. We've got more callers waiting on the line, but we're also close to a commercial break, so we're going to let that go until we come on back here. Meanwhile, the early winter is hitting up in Minnesota, 10 inches of snow, 4 dead. 217 crashes across the state. Remember back in 1990s when they said 2000, snowfall's a thing of the past. Wrong. Yet another lie. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we take the phone calls, they're running a story right now where North Korea has announced they're going to launch a satellite into space. And, of course, everybody's screaming, it's a cover for a nuclear weapons test. And it does look like everybody's gearing up for this war in North Korea. And is it going to happen while Trump is in Asia, after he comes back from Asia? Obviously, it would be a lot safer for Trump if they crank up hostilities when he's back in Washington, D.C. But I actually had somebody write in a suggestion where my first instinct was to hit the delete key, and then the more I thought about it, the more I said, we can't really rule it out. And the reader's suggestion was that the U.S. could shoot down Air Force One and blame it on North Korea. And that would get their war with North Korea going, and it would certainly solve all of Hillary Clinton's and Podesta's and everybody else's problems. So, boy, I got to tell you, I actually do feel sorry for Donald Trump. I don't agree with everything that he's done. I'm still glad that he was able to prevail over Hillary Clinton. But he did want the job, and he's got it right now. I just wish he had some better advisors around him. All right, let's take a phone call. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Frank?
With regards to, yes, thanks, Mike. Yeah, thanks, Mike. With regards to Trump's Asian tour, I think he's going to be stopping in the Vietnam area there. And, there was a former congressman, I believe, maybe from New York, in the early 1980s that spoke before Trump this past July 4th. And he was speaking to the bikers, the Rolling Thunder group, and he was talking about, all these guys, maybe as many as 200 or more. And he had sources telling him that they're still in Vietnam alive, these POWs that were left there as collateral. I guess there was supposed to be some type of a Marshall-type plan to rebuild, South Vietnam, but I guess the U.S. government reneged, and so they were never released. And I just wonder what the odds would be that President Trump, might address that issue.
I would say close to nothing. And it is a tremendous shame for the United States. And the interesting thing is, in that second Rambo movie, they even mention this. That basically, at the end of the war, the U.S. had agreed to pay reparations to the government of Vietnam in exchange for the POWs, and that they just decided, no, we're going to keep the money, keep the POWs, we're going to pretend they don't exist. And what's really ironic is to see John McCain, who is preferred to us as a hero of Vietnam for having survived his imprisonment there. And, of course, now we know that he was actually making propaganda tapes for North Vietnam, which is an act of treason. John McCain has been at the forefront of just shutting down any possible inquiry into whether there are surviving POWs in Vietnam. And I remember seeing a documentary not too long ago that presented a compelling case that, there were quite a few of the Vietnam veterans, obviously this many years after, many of them have passed away. Some of them actually left Vietnam and moved to Russia, and they're still living there.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that. Hey, while I've got you, I heard you talking earlier. You said that there were a couple of automobile accident victims who were also survivors of the Vegas shooting, and the daughter had stated that it was like a bomb went off in the car. What were those names again?
It's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and I've already deleted it from my talking points, so I don't remember the name. But there have been claims of a lot of people who were talking about multiple shooters. There was that 28-year-old girl was trying to organize a group of people to go public and say there were multiple shooters, and she was found dead in her bed, declared natural causes. And there have been a couple of stories that did not pan out, that were obviously planted fakes to try and get everybody discredited. But this story about the car accident even made the Washington Post. And the story was that they'd gone back home, and their daughter was at home, and she heard this huge bang. That's the word she used to describe it, and ran on out, and there was the car just engulfed in flames. And apparently it took firefighters a couple of hours to put it all on out, but the official story is he hit a guardrail. Well, I'm sorry, hitting a guardrail with a car generally doesn't trigger a monumental explosion unless, of course, you're working for NBC News trying to discredit side-mounted fuel tanks on pickup trucks, but that's another matter entirely.
Okay, sounds legitimate then. Hey, also you had mentioned crowdsource earlier, and back in the summer I think I might have called in and mentioned I heard what I believe is a pretty credible guy. I don't agree with him on everything, but I don't think he would have said this unless he had a pretty credible source. He basically was going through the names of the people that basically make up crowdsource.
I think you mean
and these were
CrowdStrike.
Israelis. CrowdStrike?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was the Seth Rich, to do with regarding the matter of the Seth Rich laptop and everything. And the forensic, investigation on that. I mean, I believe that was an you don't ever hear anything about it that was an Israeli, or at least the guys who made up that company controlled it were Israelis.
Well, there was a lot of information at the time, and I don't know that it was totally Israelis. I know that there were some there. But the important part to keep in mind is the entire claim of Russia hacking the DNC emails came from this CrowdStrike, which then came under criticism by other security companies questioning their methods, and then CrowdStrike pulled back from the claim and said, we're not supporting that any longer. And still, that was the beginning of the campaign of sanctions against Russia. So CrowdStrike does need to be investigated. When they're done skinning Fusion GPS and nailing that hide to the barn wall, we definitely need to look at CrowdStrike, because it looks like there's this whole network of these companies and businesses and things that were set up to launder this smear campaign against Donald Trump and against Russia. Are you there? No, I guess we lost that phone call. All right, we're going to switch over to another Frank. This one's in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? I'm sorry.
Thank you so much.
There we are. Okay.
Okay. Very good, Michael. Thank you so much for taking my phone call. And you brought up before about opioids being prescribed, and there was a bust on physicians that were prescribing opioids. If you look at the Obamacare, which is mandating people to take health insurance, and you look at opioid addiction, you can see it going up almost 400%, because that is a drug of choice for many, many physicians to prescribe opioids for just about everything, even migraine headaches. Mm-hmm. Instead of, treating the problems of the individual, they mask it with opioids, and it's a highly addictive narcotic.
Yes.
And then you look at very highly addictive, and then you look at how it decimated communities. I mean, why go to the local heroin dealer when you can get your opioids practically for free? So when you talk about, or when they talk about government mandate health insurance, you would have an opioid crisis that would topple what happened in China in the 1800s. That's what's going to happen if we allow government to go into a single-payer Bernie Sanders type of a plan, because this all leads back to what was predicted by the John Birch Society over 30 years ago. And if I find that newsletter, Michael, I'll send you a copy of it. But over 30 years ago, the John Birch Society said, welcome to the Rothschild-Rockefeller Medical Industrial Complex. And in it, they listed 3 things that's going to happen. 1 was mandate all people to have health insurance. 2 was to put all the resources in diagnostic care and treatment, but never find a cure.
Yes.
And the last was to create diseases out of thin air. Birches predicted this 30 years ago. We got it going on now. Now we have this opioid crisis where Big Pharma and the doctors, which are their pawns, and the ACA, American Medical Association, which got their shills on it, that are pushing opioids. And then at the end of it, they're pushing Narcan, to get you out of when you overdose. So they're making money at both ends. This whole situation we have today has been caused by government, and our Congress refuses to hold hearings on this opioid crisis. Now, Trump, I take my hat off. He did bring it up.
Yes.
It is a national epidemic.
Yes.
It is a national yes, it is a national epidemic. But instead of investigating, Manafort, or what the hell this guy's name is, and this one, this is a national crisis. And if they want to get to the root of resolving this issue with the opioid crisis, they better hold some honestly open congressional hearings on what went wrong in this nation, and start with this ACA program that they force people taking health insurance. That was one of the components of it. Big Pharma and physicians that are told to prescribe opioids or make it a drug of choice for just about any type of ailment you have. And that's about it, Michael.
No, yeah, they've turned doctors into pushers. And the big stink here with this one prosecution the Department of Justice is engaging in is that the physicians did have different options for treating pain, including ones that are not addictive, and they were financially incentivized by the pharmaceutical company to intentionally hook patients on these opioids so that they would be on them for the rest of their lives. And there's no difference between these big pharmaceutical companies and the drug lords, and there's no difference between these doctors in their white lab coats and the guy down on the street corner. It's exactly the same thing. We're trying to get people addicted. We're just out here to make the money. And it really is a scandal. And there should be hearings. There probably won't be because, again, the pharmaceutical industries are huge, huge donors to Congress. Congress actually did hold hearings at one point over the very obvious connection between prescription psychiatric drugs and out-of-control random acts of violence that make no sense. And in the end, Congress decided, well, there really isn't anything we can do about it.
Excellent points, Michael. And if you look at what communities were ravaged the most by this opioid epidemic, it was basically middle America. And what the point I will allude to is that you go to any mid-size or small city under 25,000 population, you would see nearly a pharmacy on every single corner.
Yes.
Way past the population what it had back in the 1960s when I was a kid growing up. And there's a reason for that. Like you said, the reason is not only opioids, but psychiatric prescription drugs combined with God knows what else, for every other imaginary disease they create, like, ADA and HHCD and whatever heck disease. And this is where they're decimating middle America. And people got to be aware of this. When these pharmacies come in and you see 1, 2, 3, 4 with a population of 8 to 10,000 people, that community has been targeted by Big Pharma to get people addicted onto either opioids or prescription drugs as far as psychiatric or whatever.
Well, the interesting thing is George Carlin, early in his career, actually commented on this. He said, we've got a drug problem in the United States because of all these drugstores. Everywhere you turn, drugs. And I think what is going on here, the reason they're targeting middle America is the poor communities are already saturated with drugs, and they've already been bled dry for all the available money they have to be made to the drug dealers. So they wanted to target middle class, but middle class people tend to avoid street drugs, so legitimize them by having them prescribed by the doctors and sold by the pharmacies, and then these middle class Americans are okay taking these drugs and enjoying them because they're free of the stigma of the street crime.
Absolutely, and then the end result is to get addicted where they can literally break the addiction. Isn't that a shame? They are wrecking havoc through this country, and they really, really are driving people. They're taking their souls out of them by this addiction. They're driving families apart. Yep. They're destroying the productivity levels of this nation, and
Absolutely.
They're doing a damn good job of it, boy. They are doing it. All right, Michael, thank you so much for taking my call, and keep up the good work. Bless you for everything you do.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. I remember many years ago, I forget exactly how many, Claire went through this episode of searing, intense joint pain, which we finally figured out is she's sensitive to formaldehyde precursors. Prior to that, we were still in the grip of the orthodox medical establishment, and they prescribed her a medication for pain, which turned out had been prescribed off-label. It wasn't really a pain medication. What it was highly addictive, and Claire had a very difficult time getting off of it. And she told the doctor she wanted to be off it, and the doctor said, okay, didn't tell her that she had to phase down slowly. She could have gone into convulsions. So, again, I'm seeing less and less difference between the classical drug lord and the big pharmaceutical industries and the street dealers and these medical practitioners in their white coat. It's just a facade so the drug lords can hit those middle-class Americans who would be averse to the illegality of the street drugs. But money is money is money is money is money. Now then, getting on back to the gun grabbers, and they're still out there. Britain banned guns many, many years ago. There was a mass shooting, and Britain said, okay, that's the end of it. You're allowed to own certain hunting weapons, but they have to be kept at your hunting club. You're not allowed to have guns in your home. Huzzah, huzzah, everything's going to be fine. The opposite happened. Violent crime exploded and continues to increase. And Great Britain justifies continuing their gun ban because it makes the British people feel like they're safer, even though they are not, in fact, safer. In fact, they're at more risk. But that's the way politicians think. We just need to make you feel like you're safe. We just need to make you feel the economy is okay. We just need to make you feel Saddam Hussein was a threat, and all will be well. That's how they think. Now, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee appears to be trying to salvage its damaged reputation. This year's Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, for its successful effort to establish a global treaty that bans nuclear weapons. It hasn't been signed and ratified, especially by the United States, which is now ramping up their nuclear arsenal as fast as they can. But their heart was definitely in the right place. Now, we're ultimately aiming toward one of two things, a world in which nobody has nuclear weapons or everybody has nuclear weapons as a deterrent. We'll never achieve a world without nuclear weapons. The genie is out of the bottle. Countries like Israel are going to make nuclear weapons. They'll pretend they don't have them. So the best solution for world peace is go the other way. Allow everyone to have nuclear weapons of deterrence. And that's going to calm everything down. That's why the U.S. is after Iran and North Korea. North Korea is on the verge of having a nuclear deterrent. That means the U.S. won't be able to invade them easily. That's the real issue here. So, again, look who the aggressor is over the last 16 years. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program on this Monday. And a couple of stories we're looking at right now. Over in Washington State, KONG-TV has done an undercover investigation. And we've been talking about the Hanford nuclear disposal plant. There's a huge radioactive waste problem. Apparently, there was a company that was given a contract to dispose of radioactive waste, and they were caught simply dumping it along the banks of the Columbia River. And that, of course, means everybody downstream is exposed, all the fish downstream are contaminated. But it's a horrendous, horrendous scandal and a big stink. And so it's ugly. We've got that up at whatreallyhappened.com. Finally, over in Philadelphia, 4 Philadelphia election workers have been charged with fraud and voter intimidation. And apparently this all took place at a special election earlier this year. Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro announced Monday the workers have been charged with fraud and voter intimidation during the March 21st election for a seat in the State House of Representatives. Shapiro says the workers at a North Philadelphia polling place became aggressive with a voter and also told another voter that a voting machine was broken, although investigators later determined it had been operational all day. Allegations of voter fraud, electioneering, and voter intimidation were reported to city and state officials during and after the election, and there are continuing investigations. Like I said, the entire society has become corrupt. Our elections are an illusion. We're in the grip of a criminal government, a narcocracy. And we have to wake up and realize that. Remember that wonderful premiere episode of HBO's The Newsroom, Will McAvoy gets up there, and he's on that stage, and he says, the first step in dealing with a problem is acknowledging that there is one. And this is the problem. Our entire governmental system has become corrupt from top to bottom. Securities Exchange Commission, FDA, USDA, Minerals Management Service, they're all corrupted by that huge flow of money coming from those giant corporations. And the giant corporations are spending that money to make themselves even more money. And left behind in all of this are the ordinary, law-abiding, honest, ethical, moral American people, their standard of living, their health, the health of their children, their education, the infrastructure, it's all crumbling away. A lot of people have been wondering if the United States might someday be a third world nation. I think we're already there in terms of the economic disparity and the wealth inequality. And as we head off toward apparently a new world war, which is probably going to go nuclear, I am convinced the United States cannot prevail. They cannot prevail in a conventional war against a peer like China or Russia, or both of them put together, because of the poor quality and high cost of our weapons, and the fact that all of our stockpiles and existing weaponry are drawn down and worn out from 16 years of war across the globe. So that brings us to the end of this show. We're going to be keeping an eye again. Russiagate is the top priority, the Russian dossier. Keep those in front of the eyes of everybody that you know. This Manafort is a distraction only. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for the John Stedmiller program. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please take everything that you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. We are in a fight, not just for the future of the United States, but for the entire planet. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.